So I had a pretty rough year in terms of just people who meant a lot to me dying. You know, Lil Peep, that was brutal. Gabe Brooks, like a good friend of mine, BMX rider from LA. Him passing, you know, those were both tough. But when I really think about it, the Combat Jack one is, that was brutal, and I really haven't dealt with it in a lot of ways. And it's also kind of like a guilty feeling for me that I haven't really documented any of these passings that I've dealt with in terms of like video content, which seems like a really obvious way to go about, sorting through my feelings and making something meaningful that other people would care about and everything. But, you know, a lot of times it just feels weird to have to like cement your feelings into place in terms of how you felt about somebody who passed. But I just have been thinking about Combat Jack so much over the past couple of days, and I just really, really wanted to speak on him because, you know, Combat Jack in a lot of ways, we're a little similar. He's about 20 years older than me, but he came into fruition on the internet at the beginning of the blogging era, you know, and before that he was a lawyer. This is like a really crazy thing that a lot of people don't seem to understand about Combat Jack. He was the first, I shouldn't say the first, but he was one of the first hip-hop lawyers in the sense that, you know, for rappers, for somebody like Dame Dash or Puffy or whatever, in the late 90s and everything, you know, the lawyers that they were used to dealing with were, for the most part, Jews and white people, you know, and that's fine. But there's definitely a degree to which, you know, somebody like Dame Dash probably didn't fully feel like his lawyers understood him and didn't understand the culture that he was coming from. And when I talked to Combat about how he came into the game, that was one thing that he said, was just that, you know, these people didn't necessarily, that people felt a different level of comfort and stuff with him because he was really of the culture. And then what's really crazy is that, you know, obviously as a lawyer, you can make a lot of fucking money. I mean, Combat fell back on that shit because he just wasn't happy with it and, got really into just writing about hip-hop, which if you want to, like, look at the totem pole of how much money you can make in the music industry, I would say that being a writer is probably very, very close to the bottom of the totem pole, and being a lawyer is probably, it's up there. So, you know, that in and of itself is a pretty impressive decision to me. But what really stood out to me about it was that he just seemed to have made that decision in good faith because he just really cared about the culture so much. So when he saw the whole blogging thing starting to take off, he got on board. He started writing for Byron Crawford's website at the time. You know, Combat Jack in many ways is a lot older than somebody like me, or Nas from Cocaine Blunts, or SK from Now Right, or all the guys from Two Dope Boys and everything. Like, these are the dudes who sort of inspired me as a young dude. Like, when I say I come from the blogging generation, a lot of you are probably like, you know, what were you doing in regards to hip-hop in 2005, 2006 when the whole blogging thing popped up? Well, I kind of knew my place at the time. I knew I wasn't necessarily in a place to have like a really important perspective on hip-hop, so instead I did the BMX blog thing, and that became my life for 10 years. But then, you know, once the podcast thing sort of started to come around, Combat, he fell back on the blogging thing and stopped writing so much and just started to do the podcast thing and really found his voice and found his way to affect the culture as much as possible through that. And that was so influential on me. Like, when I really became a huge Combat fan was when I just started listening to his podcast and just saw him week after week just sort of relentlessly documenting what was going on around him and having these really deep, meaningful conversations about rap. And when I think about it now too, it's like he probably wasn't really making much money off that, if any, doing the podcast stuff in the beginning. You know, obviously there's brand deals here and there and everything, but I mean, a lot of times that stuff doesn't really, it's not consistent. I doubt it had much to do with why he was doing this stuff every day or every week. He was doing it because he cared, because he really like just loved hip-hop and just wanted to, he just had something to say about it. And that's what's beautiful when I look back at that blogging era. That was the first time where the hip-hop media, and I'm talking about 2005, 2006, that sort of era, that was the first time that the hip-hop media, if you really cared about rap and you had something to say about it, you could just do it. And you didn't have to go intern at the Source. You didn't have to go, you know, try to get something going at XXL or whatever, or, you know, try to find a way to get MTV to give you an opportunity or something like that just because you had something to say about rap music. This is the early era of where you could have an audience and you could have a voice just by going online and just being yourself. And Combat was a very early, representation of that, even though he was much older than the average person who got into that field. So, I mean, that was a big deal to me. And then he still had his finger on the pulse in the sense that he recognized what was happening with podcasting. And when I look at where the passionate documentation of hip-hop is coming from at this point in our history, you know, I look at podcasting and rap, and I'm kind of like, that's where a lot of the most interesting stuff is coming from. And Combat was at the very, very front of that. You know, I give Rosenberg credit because Rosenberg, I think, was the first hip-hop podcaster, him and Juan Epstein. But Combat was right behind him, and Combat did an amazing, consistent job for all those years. And when I think about it, it's like, that's what hip-hop needs. Remember, I was having a conversation with academics, and you can say whatever the fuck you want about academics, but the first time we had a conversation, I was almost like, you know, I'm surprised you fuck with me, like, and he was just like, you know, you're pushing the culture forward. And that just like occurred to me as like, that's a fucking dope thing to base your metric for other people on, you know? Like if you truly believe that somebody's pushing the culture forward, and you take a look at that and that's how you judge somebody, like, this guy's worthy of having a conversation with or having my respect just because of the fact that he is concerned with the culture, then that's an amazing thing. And Combat, more than almost anybody, I look at him and I'm just like, this is a guy who maybe even against his best interests was so passionate about rap that he just let that become his life and just fully embrace that. All right, so what I was saying, I guess basically I'm just trying to put it in perspective of how hard it was for somebody, you know, in the 90s or the early 2000s and stuff to have a perspective and to get that perspective out into the world if they had a perspective on rap or anything, really. Somebody like Combat Jack, you know, he made that lane for himself, and he was a trailblazer. You know, like, not a lot of people had done what he did before him. He figured it all out. And I mean, one of the huge honors that I've had in my life was the fact that when he welcomed me into his podcast network, Loudspeakers, and like fully had a conversation with me on his podcast where he acknowledged that he really respected and appreciated what I was doing in my life, that just was like such a crazy honor that I didn't know I was seeking that approval necessarily. I mean, there was definitely, when I signed to Loudspeakers, I realized that it was a big deal. Like, whoa, this is me really being accepted into like a sort of elite podcasting network, and that was incredible and everything. But when I really had that sit down conversation with him, where he really like inspired me to like keep pushing and to keep trying to document what's going on around me, I mean, that just meant so much to me. That was just the ultimate form of respect that you could get, just like having somebody like Combat and his team acknowledge and respect what you were bringing to the game. And like, I mean, for me to just be able to sit there and have a conversation with Combat and have him acknowledge my contribution was like one of the most meaningful things that I feel like I've ever had in terms of this game that I found myself caught up in. And like, I mean, really, when you think about it, there's a very limited number of people that are really going to be able to have like a true impact and have a voice that's like loud enough and strong enough that it resonates with people. But the more of those voices that we have that are strong enough that they could break an artist or, you know, or take some kid and bring him up to a different level, take him from being a nobody and make him a little something. I mean, that's amazing. And like, what's a tragedy is that even within the Loudspeakers world, like, I mean, we lost Tax. I don't know for how long, but we lost him for a significant period of time. We lost Combat like roughly a year after that. I mean, it's hard to take, but I mean, it just reminds me that I'm so lucky to be in the position where people actually give a fuck about what I have to say about rap music. And I don't take that lightly. I don't take that with a degree of like disrespect. I take that as a very, very serious thing, that I'm really, really fucking lucky, especially being somebody who's like from a small town, who's not black, who's not from fucking Harlem or something like that. And the fact that I still have been able to make a position for myself where somebody like Combat Jack would show me respect, it's like incredible. And I'm just so thankful that he was able to that we were even able to have that conversation. I mean, he probably never could have understood how much confidence that gave me and how important what I'm doing with my life all of a sudden felt after having that conversation with Combat. And that's a big part of where I'm at right now, is I'm determined to continue to push this shit forward and continue to leave a positive impact, and that I'm not gonna, you know, get distracted from that. And I just really wanted to like communicate that to the world, because I just want to see more people take a look at Combat's life, study what he did with his podcast and how many people he helped and how many people he put on. When he saw Tax Stone and saw how much talent Tax had, he didn't get jealous. He didn't start to think like, oh, this guy's gonna affect my podcast numbers, even though it like probably quite literally did. Like, you know, introducing all these younger faces and everything, of course that was going to take attention away from the original like hip-hop podcast that came out, but he didn't give a fuck. You know, he just wanted to help elevate people. And like, even him giving me a voice, you know, he was acknowledging that like, yeah, maybe I'm not going to be the most relevant, most important voice in hip hop forever. These younger dudes that I'm gonna help bring into the game will be. And I mean, he understood the inherent like value and having those people's respect. And I mean, that's really what it's all about. You know, if you're selfish, if you're somebody who's just gonna sit in your place for the rest of your life and just not be willing to encourage other people, then you're never gonna really make like a true lasting impression on the culture. So I mean, I just wanted to communicate this and get it all out there. I know that there's so many people from, you know, Jonathan Mena and Matt Raz and Chris Morrow and just so many different people that I met, A-King, that I met through combat, that I just have so much respect for what they're doing. And I know that they're all focused on continuing the tradition of what combat brought into the game. You know, he believed in like internet content, video, podcast, whatever. He believed in all that shit and he was fascinated by it, and he never let the fact that he was an old dude get in the way of the fact that he knew that he could have an impact using this new media. So for all the people out there watching this, watch him and like, you know, watch other people who are similar in this space, because there's a lot of people out there that could have powerful voices on the internet. That's one thing that I sometimes am a little bit disappointed, is that there's just not enough representation of the huge multitude of voices within hip hop on YouTube. Like there should be 10 other dudes who are just as popular as I am on an independent level in terms of making content about rap music, underground rap music. There's not a lot holding you back. Like if you're decent on camera and if you care about this shit, I mean, what the fuck is stopping you? I mean, for me, it's a fucking iPhone. It's just still an iPhone right now. So, I mean, I want everybody out there to just think about it. Take some fucking time. Think about what combat brought into the culture and think about what you could potentially do for rap music, or not even rap music, for whatever you are passionate about, for whatever you care about, whether you're into fucking skateboarding or BMX or whatever, gymnastics. I don't know. Go out there and just document what the fuck's going on. If you care about shit, it don't matter if it's not going to do crazy numbers. Just do it. Hopefully I did an okay job expressing how much this guy meant to me. Rest in peace, Combat Jack forever. Loudspeakers forever. Love you guys. All right, I was just editing this just a couple days later, and I remembered another example of the impact that combat had on me. I started a little teary-eyed editing that, but this is the thing. Years ago, in the very, very early stages of the Combat Jack podcast, when it was still kind of like a radio show, whatever, he started out a show going at Papoose, just fully destroying him. For those who don't know, Papoose was like the coolest rapper out of New York in like 2003, underground dude coming out, and then his career sort of stalled out and, you know, didn't necessarily go anywhere for a while. In combat, being from Brooklyn and everything, he made a video basically telling Pap, like, you gotta hang it up, you gotta stop, you're making a fool of yourself. Like, it was brutal, a brutal takedown. Like, that's the kind of thing that these days would go viral as fuck. It'd be on World Star, it'd be on Academics, whatever. But at the time, it really stood out to me because that shit did pop up on the World Star website. And I just was like, yo, like, Combat kind of like knew what he was doing right there. He picked something, picked a public figure, had an opinion, went in. And in a weird way, I was impressed, but I also didn't really understand because I never saw him do that again. And I got the feeling that he was a little bit regretful about it. So that's one of the first things I asked him about when I met him in person. I was just like, yo, like, explain that Papoose situation to me. And the way he explained it was like, yeah, you know, I got a lot of hype off of that, a lot of views, a lot of people talking about my podcast. For a lot of people, that was the first time that they ever heard about it. But ultimately, it left him feeling like shit. Because he took a good dude like Papoose, who at the end of the day, like, I don't know that much about him as a person or whatever, but, you know, seems like a good guy. At the end of the day, just because his raps weren't popping off, it's like that doesn't really have anything to do with what kind of person you are. At the end of the day, he might be the best dude on earth. It doesn't matter that the industry fucked around. I mean, rap is a fucking popularity contest. It's a cool contest. And it's like, just because you're not the coolest rapper doesn't mean that you're a bad dude. And Combat, like, broke through that wall for me so that I didn't have to. So that, like, he figured out that shitting on someone and bringing somebody else down and fucking their career over, even just a little bit, that's not the way. Like, you would way rather build a career slowly off of just making good content rather than having to drag somebody down, like slander somebody, even if that is your real opinion. It's like, at the end of the day, like, he realized that he didn't want to be the person dragging people down. And he went through that experience so that I didn't have to, so that I realized that when I started doing this kind of content, that I didn't want to be that person. I didn't want to be somebody who was tearing people down just to make a name for myself. And hearing Combat express that so eloquently to me when I first met him was one of like the most important things in terms of me realizing what kind of content I wanted to make. So, thank you, Combat, for the culture.